Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how NestJS middlewares and interceptors work, so we can use those to implement cross-cutting concerns such as caching and logging. And if you want to deploy your application in a reliable infrastructure with a predictable pricing model, check out Linode. You can find the link in the description below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and let's get started. NestJS middlewares. A middleware is a function that is called before the route handler with access to the request and response objects and the next middleware function. If the current middleware function is not able to end the request response cycle, it must call the next function to pass control to the next middleware function. By default, a NestJS middleware is equivalent to an Express middleware. What can I do in a middleware function? I can execute any code. I can make changes to the request and the response objects. I can end the request response cycle, or I can call the next middleware function. Okay, let's jump into Visual Studio Code and let's create a custom middleware to audit some specific operations performed in our API. Okay, as you may remember, in the first video of the NestJS crash course, we created an API, a Jobs API actually, and we implemented a controller, that is this one. And here we created some methods for each of the endpoints of our RESTful API. We created a get operation where we are passing the identifier of the job to get that specific job. We created a post method to create a new job. We also created a put method to update the data of a specific job. And we also added a delete operation. And here we have this decorator. These are actually decorators. And here we have the decorator to handle the delete HTTP method. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a custom middleware to actually audit all the delete operations that are going to be performed in our API. So a middleware will be executed before reaching this method here. So what we're going to do is we're going to log some specific data from the request. And so let's do that now. I'm going to create a folder, middlewares, and I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call it audit.middleware.ts. And here, what I need to do is I need to create a class, export class audit middleware, and this class needs to implement the Nest middleware interface. So Nest middleware, and here the Nest middleware interface, if we go inside that interface, we need to implement this method. So we are going to run a quick fix here. This is going to automatically add a template for that method. And here we have the template of the method, and as we can see here, we get access to the request, the response, and the next function of the request response lifecycle. So here we can use the Express classes. So request, this is actually an interface from Express. If we go here, if we go there, we're going to see that this is an interface. Okay. And also here we can import the response from Express, like that. And here we can say that this is going to be a function, actually, function. Okay. And here we are going to start working on our audit logic, right? This needs to be injectable. So we are going to use that decorator here. And now what we're going to do here is we're going to console log some properties from the request. We're going to log the IP address, the path, and the headers, for example. We can do that. Login, delete, request, IP, and we can access the IP property from the request. Console.log. I'm going to copy this. Login, delete, request, and path, and we can access the path property from the request that path, like that. And we can also access the headers, for example. So login, delete, request, headers, and we can access the headers property from the request, like that. And this is our audit middleware. So every time that we receive a delete request, we are going to log all these properties from the request: the IP address, the path, and the headers. And now we need to set it up. So in order to set it up, we are going to do that within the shops module that includes the controller, the service. And what we need to do here is we need to implement an interface that is the Nest module interface. And if we go here, this is going to give us a quick fix here. And this is going to add the skeleton of the configure method. If we go to the interface, we're going to see that that's the only method that we need to implement. So let's go back and let's click here on quick fix and implement interface Nest module. Okay. And we'll remove this, and I'm going to remove this here, and I'm going to add this here, because I can import that middleware consumer from the NestJS common library. Okay, and here what we're going to do is we're going to apply the middleware that we just created to the consumer, to this middleware consumer. So first I'm going to import audit middleware from that middleware / audit middleware, and we're going to pass that class here in the apply function. And because we created this audit middleware class as injectable, using this injectable decorator, the NestJS framework, let me close this, the NestJS framework is going to automatically create an instance for us here. And after this, we can set up the routes that we want to use to apply this audit middleware. So we can say for routes, and we can pass an object, and this object is going to include a couple of attributes. One is going to be the path. In this case, we're going to use the shops path. If we go to the controller, we have the shops string as part of the URL, and we're going to use that to set up our middleware here. So we're going to say jobs slash, and we are going to use the wildcard. And here we can also set the method. That is going to be the delete HTTP method, like that. And that's all we need to set up our audit middleware for this specific method. And now if we go back to Postman and we click on send, okay, we have some shop postings already there. And I'm going to remove one of these. And we're gonna see here in the log, we're gonna see these messages, the IP address, the path, and the headers. Okay, so let's run this delete operation. And as we can see, we get the IP address. This is localhost using IPv6. This is the path, and these are the headers of the request. And the problem here is that what we need to do here is we need to call the next function. So I'm going to add that here, just below this console log. And now is going to actually run the delete operation. And let's run it again. Let's delete that shop posting. And now it's actually executed. And here we have all the messages that we defined here in our audit middleware. Login, delete records IP, path, and headers. And if we go back to Postman and we execute the get operation, we are not going to see this element again. It was actually removed. NestJS interceptors. Interceptors allow us to implement aspect-oriented programming, so we can add extra logic before or after the execution of a method. We can transform the result of a function. We can transform the exception thrown from a function. We can extend the basic function behavior, or we can completely override a function depending on specific conditions, for example, caching. As we've already seen with pipes, interceptors can be controller scoped, method scoped, or global scoped. And an interceptor implements the intercept method with access to the execution context that is actually an instance of the execution context class. Using that class instance, we can access the HTTP request and response objects. Let's jump into Visual Studio Code and let's see how we can use interceptors for caching and also for benchmarking in our API. Okay, we are going to set up first a caching interceptor, and we are going to install a library for that. npm install save, and it's going to be a cache manager. And this cache is going to be in memory. We can also set up this cache using Redis, for example. We can use some decorators that are part of the NestJS common library. And for example, we can set the key of our cache using this decorator. We can say here, single quotes, all jobs. And we can set up the TTL of this specific, for this specific method. Now we're going to see how we can set it up globally, and this is going to override the TTL that we defined there. But first, let's define it locally. And here we can say 15 seconds, for example. And we can do the same for this method here. And here we can say, I don't know, 30. And we need to use this interceptor. There's another decorator called use interceptors, and here we can add a list of interceptors. In this case, we're going to use the cache interceptor. That is actually this one. Okay. And to set it up, we need to go to our shops module. We need to add the cache module, like this. Cache module that register. And here we pass an object as a parameter. And here we set the TTL, the global TTL in this case. Let's say 5 seconds. These are seconds. And the maximum quantity of items within that cache. Let's say, I don't know, 100. Maximum number of items in cache. And that's all we need to set up our in-memory cache. If you want to set up Redis, for example, we need to add some more parameters here, such as the URL, the port, etc. Okay, let's try this. I'm going to start the server again. And let's go to Postman. And here, first I'm going to execute the GET request. This should be caching this data for 15 seconds. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove one element directly from the database, and I'm going to remove the first element. So I'm going to delete this document, but I should still get it. Yeah, I still get it, but if we wait a couple of seconds, now, yeah, was removed. So let's go back, and the same is gonna happen for this find endpoint, for this get endpoint by ID. So we can run this. Let's create. Now let's add this identifier here. Okay, we still get that element, but let's go to the cache. Sorry, let's go to the database. And let's remove that one. It's actually this one, the first one. Let's remove that document. And now if we call it, we still get it. It's going to be available for 30 seconds. Okay, and now it's no longer available. Great. Okay, now we have our cache all set. And now what we are going to do is we're going to create a benchmark interceptor that is going to log the execution time of each of these methods here. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it, let me close this. Okay, I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call it Interceptors. And I'm going to add a new file. This is going to be benchmark.interceptor.ts. Okay, now I'm going to grab this class from the NestJS documentation, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit. I'm going to add a couple of things. We have access to the execution context. That is actually this interface that extends argument host. And we are going to use this method to access this interface where we can get the request and the response. And we are going to extract the HTTP request URL and method, and we are going to show the execution time for that specific endpoint using that HTTP method. Okay, let's go back. Let's close this and this. Okay, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the context const ctx equals context that switch to HTTP, and now I'm able to access the HTTP request object. So const request equals ctx.get request. This is gonna be the express request. So I'm going to import that one, the first one. And I'm going to log using the console. I'm going to log the endpoint. Request that URL. And I'm going to log the HTTP method that I'm using to execute that endpoint. Method request that method. Yeah, and here what we are doing is we are running the next middleware in the request response lifecycle. That is actually the one that we receive here. And after that execution, we execute this tap operation and we are logging the execution time. So here we get the timestamp before running the method. And at the end, what we do here is the difference between the current date. This is where the method finishes to run, and the timestamp that we assigned before running the method. Okay, here we can say execution time. Let's go back to the controller, and the only thing that we need to do here is we need to import this benchmark interceptor. Let's rename it as benchmark interceptor. And let's import it first. Import from interceptors benchmark.interceptor. And now we can add it to this list for this use interceptors decorator. And that's all we need. This is going to show the benchmark or the execution time for every endpoint here on this controller. Okay, let's go back to Postman and let's run this endpoint. Let's do this. Let's run a find all endpoint. And if we see here, we get the endpoint, the method, and the execution time for that operation. And let's remove an element. And in this case, we're gonna see the benchmarking, and we're also gonna see these messages here that are part of the middleware. So let's run this. And if we go back here, first the middleware is going to log all these messages, the IP address, the path, and the headers, and then we're gonna see the benchmark interceptor running. That is going to show the endpoint, the method, and the execution time. That's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.